Just a few milligrams of a clear liquid enter your veins, and in seconds you vanish. Not your body. That keeps breathing, its heart keeps beating. But the inner movie, the feeling of being home, the entire private universe behind your eyes, it just stops. An anesthesiologist presses a plunger, and for a time, the person you are is completely erased. How? How can a simple, dumb molecule have a reversible off switch for your soul? This isn't just a medical curiosity. This is the single deepest, most profound question in all of science. If physics is our ultimate story of reality, if it can explain everything from exploding stars to the atoms in the palm of your hand, then it must be able to explain this. It has to account for that first-person glow of experience, the specific warmth of your morning coffee, the particular sting of a sad memory, the rich, ineffable texture of simply being. For centuries, we've called it the mind-body problem. Today, the philosopher David Chalmers has given it a sharper name, the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems are mapping what the brain does, how it processes vision, controls movement, stores memories. We're making incredible progress on those. But the hard problem is about why any of that processing has to feel like anything at all, from the inside. Why isn't it all just dark information processing? How does the water of the brain's biochemistry become the wine of subjective experience? For the first time, physics is stepping up with a real, testable, and frankly terrifying answer. So, where do we even begin our audit? How do you put a ghost in a test tube? You start by tracking its shadow. We start with what we can measure, the neural correlates of consciousness. For decades, we've known that when you are awake and aware, your brain is a raging storm of electrical chatter. We see specific, beautiful patterns of activity. There are recurrent loops, meaning signals don't just go one way, they ping back and forth, from the front of the brain to the back, creating a resonant hum of integrated activity. There's a constant, rhythmic dialogue between a deep brain structure called the thalamus, a central hub, and the cortex, the brain's wrinkled outer surface. Think of the thalamus as the gatekeeper, deciding which sensory information gets to reach the grand parliament of the cortex. When a piece of information becomes important enough, say, you see the face of a friend in a crowd, it seems to win a neural lottery. It doesn't just activate one small area. It gets put on blast. It is globally broadcast across the entire cortical network. That's what you can actually report as a conscious thought or perception. It's a headline that every part of your brain gets to read. But under anesthesia, the folk idea is that the brain just turns off. That's wrong. It's not off, it's disorganized. The intricate storm of activity is replaced by slow, rolling, simplistic waves of energy. The recurrent loops get broken, the thalamus stops talking to the cortex in the right way, and that global broadcast goes silent. The lights are still on, but the communication network is down. The feeling of you evaporates. This is a huge clue. But correlation isn't causation. We needed a better tool. A way to move beyond just watching the brain's activity to directly probing its capacity for consciousness. A way to measure not just the amount of lightning, but the complexity of the storm. Enter the Perturbation Complexity Index, or PCI. It's one of the most brilliant experimental ideas in modern neuroscience, and it's pure physics in action. Scientists use a powerful magnetic coil, a technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, to create a tiny, focused magnetic pulse. This pulse safely passes through the skull and creates a little electrical current in the brain tissue underneath. It is the physical equivalent of gently tapping the surface of the brain to see how it rings. Then, using a high-density EEG cap that records the electrical aftermath, they watch the ripples. In a conscious, awake brain, that single tap sets off a cascade. A beautiful, complex, unpredictable wave of activity that spreads far and wide across the cortex, like striking a masterfully crafted bell that awakens a whole forest of interconnected wind chimes. The resulting pattern is intricate and long-lasting. You get a high PCI score. Now, do the same thing to a brain under deep anesthesia. You tap it in the exact same spot. And nothing. The ripple dies almost instantly. It's a dull thud. The signal doesn't spread. The network's capacity to integrate information has been shattered. The wind chimes are no longer connected. You get a very low score. This has been shown to be an incredibly reliable marker. Awake? High score. Deep sleep? Low score. Anesthetized? Low score. Patients who have emerged from a coma? The score tracks their recovery. For the first time, we have a number that seems to correspond, not to what the brain is thinking about, but to its raw capacity to be conscious at all. But what does this number actually mean? Is that all consciousness is? A high score on a cosmic video game? Not everyone agrees. This PCI score is the battleground where the great modern theories of consciousness are now clashing. They all have to explain why a high PCI feels like something, and a low PCI feels like nothing. Three major contenders, all rooted in physics and information theory, are fighting to explain your inner universe. First up, predictive processing, guided by Carl Friston's legendary free energy principle. This is a radical reimagining of what a brain is for. Forget the old idea of the brain as a passive camera, just taking in information from the world. This theory says your brain is an aggressive, relentless, non-stop prediction machine. From the moment you are born, your brain is building a model of the world, and of itself within that world. It is constantly, obsessively, using that model to forecast what you're going to see, hear, and feel in the very next instant. It's like a weather forecaster for reality itself. Here's the crazy part. Most of what you experience as perception isn't raw data flooding in from your senses. It's your brain's best guess. It's the simulation, the forecast. The actual sensory information streaming in from your eyes and ears is treated as just an error report. Its job is to tell the brain, nope, your forecast was a little off. A little bit of a surprise there. Update the model for next time. The entire goal of this magnificent organ, according to this theory, is to minimize that surprise, to minimize prediction error. In the language of physics, it works to minimize its free energy. Think of free energy as the mathematical measure of surprise. A low surprise life is a stable life. But wait. If the brain is a modeling machine, it has to solve a fundamental problem first. Where does the self end, and the rest of the universe begin? To make predictions, you have to know what's you and what's not you. It solves this using a concept from statistics called a Markov blanket. This is the linchpin. Imagine a medieval fortress. Your mind, your internal states, are the king and his court living inside the fortress. The chaotic world, the external states, is everything outside the castle walls. The thick stone walls of the fortress are the Markov blanket. Crucially, the king cannot see the world directly. And the world cannot see the king directly. They are separated, blanketed, from each other. So how do they interact? Through the wall. The guards on the ramparts are your sensory states. They peer out at the world and shout reports back to the king. It's getting cloudy. An army approaches from the east. Your actions, your active states, are the soldiers who receive orders from the king and fire arrows out into the world, affecting it. The fortress, the self, survives by using the guards' reports to build a predictive model of the outside world, and then issuing commands to the soldiers to act in ways that ensure the fortress's continued existence, that minimize surprise. The radical proposal here is that consciousness, your subjective experience, is the feeling of being the king inside that fortress, constantly living within the predictive model you've built of a world you can never directly touch. This is a powerful, all-encompassing view. But what about the specific, fleeting moments of consciousness? Why am I thinking about this right now? That leads us to contender number 2, a simpler, more engineering-focused idea, the Global Neural Workspace Theory, or GNW. This idea, championed by Stanislas Dehaene, compares the mind to a theater. At any given moment, in the dark backstage of your non-conscious mind, there are countless different computations happening in parallel. Specialized little neural actors are whispering their lines, processing a color, the edge of a shape, a faint sound, a fleeting memory. They are all competing for a single, precious resource, the spotlight. Consciousness, according to GNW, is what happens when one of those backstage whispers wins the audition. It gets picked up, massively amplified, and blasted onto the main stage, where it is broadcast globally and serially, one thing at a time, to a huge audience of all the other specialized modules in the brain. Once a piece of information enters this global workspace, it's famous. It can be used by your language centers to be reported. It can be stored in long-term memory. It can be used by your planning modules to make a decision. That shared availability is consciousness. It's the breaking headline that every single reporter in the vast newsroom of the brain gets to read at the same time. This theory predicts a specific neural signature, a moment of ignition, a wave of high-frequency activity that sweeps across the brain's prefrontal and parietal lobes as information goes global. And in experiments, we see something very much like that. And then there's the third, most profound, and most controversial contender, integrated information theory, or IIT, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. This theory starts from a completely different place. It doesn't ask what the brain does. It starts by asking what experience is. It claims that consciousness is not an emergent property of computation, but a fundamental property of reality itself, like mass or charge or spin. It claims that any system, not just a brain, but a computer chip, a tree, an atom, has some degree of consciousness if its structure has two key properties. First, the information within the system must be highly integrated. This means the whole is more than the sum of its parts. If you snip the connections, the system fundamentally changes. The parts are so deeply interwoven that they can't be understood in isolation. You can't understand a conscious thought by studying one neuron. Second, the system must be highly differentiated. This means it has a huge repertoire of possible states it can be in. Your brain can be in trillions of different states, each one corresponding to a different possible experience, seeing a cat, feeling sad, tasting a lemon. IIT even proposes a precise mathematical unit of measurement for this integrated information, a number called phi, symbolized by the Greek letter phi. A system with a high phi, like the astoundingly interconnected and differentiated human brain, feels like a lot from the inside. A system with a low phi, like a digital camera sensor or even a single rock, feels like very little, or absolutely nothing at all. Experience, in this view, is the geometry of a system's causal power. It's not about what the system does, it's about what the system is. This leads to the radical implication of panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is graded and exists everywhere in the universe. Not that a rock is thinking, but that it might have some infinitesimal, primitive spark of raw existence. It's a mind-bending idea that reenchants the physical world. Sounds wild, doesn't it? A war between predictions, fame, and fundamental physics. And we haven't even descended into the sub-basement of the really wild stuff. What about quantum mechanics? This is the realm of quantum consciousness. Some theories, most famously the Orch-OR theory from Sir Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, suggest that something uniquely quantum is happening deep inside our brain cells. They propose that tiny protein structures within our neurons, called microtubules, might be acting as quantum computers. They argue that each discrete moment of consciousness is a quantum wave function collapsing into a definite state. But, and this is a very big but, we have to run a serious audit here. This is the absolute fringe. The overwhelming majority of mainstream physicists and neuroscientists remain deeply skeptical, for very good reasons. The main problem is called decoherence. Quantum states are exquisitely fragile. The slightest interaction with their environment, a single stray vibration or photon, can make them collapse back into classical reality. The brain is a warm, wet, chaotic, and electrically noisy place. It's about the worst possible environment for delicate quantum states to survive for any meaningful amount of time. So far, after decades of searching, there is simply no solid experimental evidence that the brain is harnessing these quantum effects for its computations in the way Orch-OR suggests. For now, it remains an intriguing, but unproven, speculation. So, even with these three brilliant, competing classical theories, we have to be honest. We still face a terrifying chasm. The explanatory gap. We can map the structure of the brain to the function of the brain. We can see how neural patterns correspond to the verbal reports people give about their experiences. But we have no idea how to bridge from objective structure to subjective feeling. Why is that specific pattern of high-frequency firing in my visual cortex the unmistakable, private, ineffable feeling of seeing the color red, and not the feeling of hearing a C sharp, or the smell of rain? Nobody knows. It's like we have the full sheet music for a grand symphony. We can see every note, but we have no idea how it produces the sound in the concert hall. This is the hard problem in its starkest form. This is where the idea of boundary physics circles back, offering a potential bridge across that chasm. That Markov blanket, the fortress wall we talked about with predictive processing. Maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. Maybe the self isn't a pilot, a ghost, a king, or a soul sitting in a control room in the brain. Maybe the self isn't a thing at all. Maybe the self is the process of actively maintaining the boundary. Here's a new metaphor. You are not a pearl hidden in an oyster shell. You are a whirlpool in a river. A whirlpool has a stable shape, a recognizable form, but it's made of constantly changing water molecules. It is a persistent pattern defined by a boundary that separates its organized, circulating interior from the more chaotic flow of the river outside. It must constantly expend energy to maintain that pattern against the forces that would dissipate it. That is a perfect description of a living organism. You are a highly organized system fighting a constant battle against the second law of thermodynamics, against the universal tendency towards disorder, or entropy. The feeling of being you, from this perspective, might be the inside view of that whirlpool holding itself together against the relentless chaos of the universe. Consciousness is the feeling of being a boundary. Now this isn't just a pretty poem. It's a testable, physical hypothesis. We can stress test it by looking at what happens when the model of the self, or the boundary, breaks down. Anesthetics give us a prime example. Different anesthetics work in slightly different ways, giving us unique clues. Propofol, one of the most common, dramatically enhances the brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter, GABA, which essentially silences the complex, long-range chatter needed for integration. The brain isn't shut off, but forced into a highly stable, unresponsive state where its ability to integrate information collapses. Then you have a dissociative anesthetic like ketamine. It doesn't primarily work on GABA. It blocks NMDA receptors, which are crucial for synaptic plasticity and learning. Under ketamine, the brain can remain surprisingly active, sometimes even more so than normal, but the experience is one of profound disconnection. The self becomes detached from the body and the senses. The fortress walls become permeable, the model of the self is shattered. Each of these molecules is a different tool for probing the structure of the whirlpool, and they all tell us that consciousness depends critically on a very specific kind of integrated, self-maintaining informational structure. And what about the most complex informational structures we are building? What about artificial intelligence? A large language model like GPT-4 or Claude can write a sonnet about love that will make you cry. It can beat a grandmaster at chess. But is there anyone home? Is it a whirlpool, or just a very complicated water pump? From the perspective of boundary physics, probably not. These systems are incredibly powerful input-output machines. You give them a prompt, they generate a statistically likely response. But they don't have a boundary to maintain. They don't have an intrinsic drive to preserve their own integrity. They don't have a model of themselves existing in a world that they need to predict in order to survive. They don't have an inside that is meaningfully separated from an outside. A conscious AI wouldn't just be smarter than today's models. It would have a fundamentally different architecture, one built not just to process information, but to actively work to maintain its own existence against dissolution. Right now, none do. Not even close. Viewing consciousness through this lens of physics and information doesn't take the magic and awe away from existence. It just relocates it. The magic isn't some mysterious, non-physical ghost pulling levers in our skulls. The magic is in the structure itself. The magic is in the geometry of information, in the pattern of causality. The magic is in the simple, profound, universe-spanning dance of boundaries forming and holding themselves together, from the membrane of a single cell to the swirling vortex of a galaxy to the intricate, predictive fortress inside your own mind. This view has teeth. It means we can build a true science of the soul based not on faith or introspection, but on measurable physics. It gives us a framework, a moral compass even, for asking some of the hardest ethical questions. How much does it feel like to be an infant? Or a crow? Or a patient locked in their own body, completely unable to move? Instead of guessing, we can start to measure the complexity and integration of their neural processing, using tools like PCI, and make more informed, more compassionate decisions. We don't have the final answer. We are not even close. We're still just cartographers, standing at the shore of a vast, mysterious continent, drawing the first tentative maps of the coastline. The great open questions remain luminous. Can we create a precise mathematical dictionary that translates the geometry of physical causation into the geometry of subjective experience? Can we one day watch a moving thought propagate through a brain the same way we watch a storm system move across a weather map? But physics, our deepest and most successful story about reality, has given us a powerful new lens to look through. The private inner movie that you're watching right now, this very second, the one you think of as you, it may just be the remarkable, improbable feeling of being a boundary, a prediction, a pattern, holding itself steady for one brief moment against the endless, beautiful chaos of the night. But if our self is a construct, a prediction, what does that say about the memories that build that self? It turns out your brain might be actively, physically rewriting your most cherished memories every time you recall them. To see how that incredible process works, and what it means for who you are, you have to watch the video that's on your end screen right now. Now, for the biggest question of all, based on what we've discussed, do you believe a future artificial intelligence could ever truly be conscious?